beautiful people. Happy Monday. You know, if it's around 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, depending on where you are. No, it's around 9 o'clock. Time fell back. I'm Babs Rose Ivy. This is Love Babs Love Talk. I'm in studio this morning with the good Dr. Kalila Brown Dean. She's going to talk about her book, Identity Politics in the United States. How you doing, girl?
I am great. How are you?
I've been waiting to have this conversation for some time.
Thank you for having me.
It's so nice to see you.
Good to see you always.
Okay, so identity politics. I'm a political junkie by nature and by habit and by training. And so of all the things to talk about in politics, why identity politics?
So I think everything in politics rests on identity.
Mm-hmm.
And at this moment where we can't seem to find any common ground, where politics seems so nasty from the local level to the national level, I wanted to give us context. How did we get here? So you can't talk about the founding of the United States without talking about identity, whether that's religious identity or identity as freedom for the crown,
Mm-hmm.
to where we are today. What does it mean to be an American? What are the protections? Why is it that certain groups have access to voting rights and others are still fighting to this day? So I think the timing of this book was appropriate, but I also wanted people to understand, how do we move forward? How do we understand those differences? How do we reconcile the past?
Mm-hmm.
And then really chart a path forward that is not some kumbaya moment. We just forget our differences and all get along.
So now people like to hurl identity politics at us when there are black candidates on the ballot, and all of a sudden identity politics becomes a whipping stick against us.
And I wanted to interrogate that idea that identity politics is negative, that it's something that other people do, right? Particularly when you're talking about communities of color or women or the intersections of those identities. That's what people want to do when they just want you to blindly vote for their candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Identity politics happens when President Trump steps out into a stadium and talks about those people who are coming to invade the United States. Remember midterms last year when there was this secret caravan of people who were coming to invade our border, right? And then a day after the election, it disappeared. That's identity politics. It's not just about elections.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to turn it on its head. Why do we think it's negative when certain groups say, my identity in this country matters? It shapes my experience, and that experience shapes my identity. But when Colin Kaepernick, for example, is taking a knee on a football field and people say you are disrespecting the flag or disrespecting our armed forces, that's identity as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is the assumption that you cannot be critical of this country and still be patriotic.
Yes.
And James Baldwin reminded us, right? I love America more than any other country in the world. And for precisely that reason, I will criticize her perpetually.
Exactly. I like this thinking. I haven't read the book yet, but it's getting good conversation. People are having, I'm getting it, girl. Don't worry.
I know.
People are having good conversations about this book. And I love the fact that you are trying to upturn this whole idea of identity crisis. Identity politics. Because when you start thinking about when people form pacts, when they form coalitions, that is based on who they are and wanting to see something move in their favor, whether it's school board stuff,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a police chief, whether it's, voting for a mayor.
Right. And so that's the piece of it that I want people to take a step back
Mm-hmm.
and look at their own politics, look at their own political affiliation. For me, as someone who grew up in the South, I saw identity politics every day. I saw it growing up in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is the home of Liberty University, the world's largest evangelical university. So it meant something when Jerry Falwell could convince people to move the day of trick-or-treating because Halloween fell on a Sunday. That's identity politics. That's about saying my religious identity should dictate what you and your children can do. And yet we accepted it then. And now we fast forward to 2019, the rise of the evangelical right,
Mm-hmm.
the influence on politics from public policy to financing to gun rights. That is identity. And then when you layer on all these other things about class, about ethnicity, about gender identity, it complicates the narrative, but it also shows us the diversity that exists within groups. And I think we need to do more of that as well.
And I think this is the thing that trips up Black people. And I'm deliberately saying Black people. I could say people of color, but I'm going to say Black people because I think people of color is like a catch-all for everybody. And I specifically want to talk about Black people. What happens, what I see is Black people get on the defense about identity politics, that they want to defend that they are not moving forward or moving in a political agenda based on race solely. Is there truth in, like, can you defend that when you walk into a space and you are Black?
I think that one thing that has to be done when we look at the defense of that is, what does it mean to be Black in America? Well, that varies, right?
It does.
The experiences of Black women vary vastly. The experiences of Black working class women who were formerly incarcerated varies greatly from people who have been able to navigate a class-based space in very different ways. What I think people need to stop doing is being ashamed of who they are, being ashamed of being connected to a history that this year, 400 years after Africans were brought to this country, there's this shame and stigma. Everybody wants to 23andMe DNA test themselves out of that history.
Wow.
There's no shame in that.
That's powerful.
Well, I always look at those commercials, right? I always thought I was this, and then I discovered that I was that. And I always want to ask, and now what? And how does that change your reality? How does that change how you move through this world? For me, there's no shame in that. There's no shame in me saying that my grandfather had an 8th grade education, that for him growing up in rural Virginia, that was an accomplishment. But I also know that there's tremendous pride in saying that is a man who really learned how to strengthen his reading by reading the newspaper and the Bible every day. And that he took from that. He has worked hard all his life so that his grandchildren can have a different experience. That's how we claim history and understand that for Black folks in America, they are able to succeed not in spite of that history, but because of that history. And all of that is captured in the book. The unique experiences of African Americans, the unique experiences of American Indians. And now when we talk about, for example, immigration to the United States, everyone focuses on the southern border. What it means to be a person from Jamaica or Haiti or from Ghana is really different in this moment. Because we're not talking about how these policy changes, refugee status, are going to compromise the life chances of thousands of people who share a melanin degree that you and I do.
And I've been paying attention to how those folks are being, those concentrations of folks are being quietly pushed out, quietly deported without, I mean, everybody's attention is on the border and rightly so, but there's a whole other group of folks where there's nobody waving signs or saying, hey, let's stop that. Or if they are, it's very limited.
Right.
It's a very limited sort of thing. So how should we be framing out this immigration conversation in the face of identity politics? What is that? What should we be thinking?
Yeah. One thing I want us to start with is why immigration policy was introduced in the United States to begin with. And when it was introduced, we didn't have laws about naturalization and what it meant to become a citizen based on country of origin for hundreds of years. And what started to happen is that people were coming from parts of Europe that those in power thought were less desirable. Right? People are coming from Ireland. They're bringing their Catholicism and their Catholic Church, and we don't want that to pollute our country. So places like Boston create new laws that meant if you were in Boston public schools, you had to read from the King James Version of the Bible, because that was an easy way to keep Catholics out of public schools. And so we developed a Catholic school system because there was no way for those Irish children to get educated and still hold on to their belief system. That's the history of immigration.
And people don't know that.
And people need to know.
They need to know, because then that changes the whole dynamic of how you march forward.
It changes the dynamic of the stories we tell, of the ways we romanticize our family history. I hear all the time, well, my ancestors came here, they worked hard, they learned language of English, now everyone else should do the same. That's not true. It's not true at all. And so for me as a professor, I love those moments when I can make my students understand that the narrative is so much more complex than what they've been told, and that they start asking questions. That's my role as a professor, as an educator, and as an author of this book. I want people to question things. It's not about me telling you what to think. It's about challenging what you have known and then figuring out how do you reconcile the two.
Now, you're a professor over at Quinnipiac University.
I am.
How long have you been there?
Oh my goodness. This is year 9.
9 years?
Yeah, it goes by fast.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is my 16th year as a university professor, now a tenured associate professor at Quinnipiac University.
Oh, that's a good thing. So tell me your background. Where are you from?
Born and raised in Lynchburg, Virginia. So I'm a country girl, and I would not trade that experience for anything. And I opened the book talking about that experience of growing up in this predominantly working class Black community, getting bused to a very affluent white community, and how as a kid, how do you navigate never feeling like you are truly a part of the place that you are supposed to belong, what it meant to be bused to this school every day and face the hostility from teachers and principals and students and also neighbors. They didn't want us there. And the reality is we didn't want to be there either. But we look back now and see how important it was for us to do that.
Where'd you go to college?
So undergrad at the University of Virginia. I'm a very proud graduate of UVA, and talked about what it meant in 2017 for white supremacists to show up at my alma mater with tiki torches screaming, "We will not be replaced."
Yeah.
My husband and I were en route to Virginia to pick up our daughter when all of that was happening. So there were a lot of tears on that highway to get her. Graduate school at The Ohio State University.
So you've come through.
So I went to UVA as an undergrad thinking I wanted to go to law school and be an attorney, and decided a week before my last year of school that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I went directly into a PhD program out of undergrad. I'm a lifelong nerd.
Wow.
And proud of it.
When did you pledge AKA?
Spring, that matters. Spring 1997
Girl,
in the Theta Kappa
us.
chapter at the University of Virginia. Shout out to my soul. We love you too, bad.
Listen, we know.
It's all love. It's all love.
Listen, I love D9. I claim it all. So there you go. So the name of the book is Identity Politics in the United States, right? Is that the correct title?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And you can get it on Amazon.
You can get it on Amazon. It is the #1 new release in civil rights. You can get it on Amazon. You can order at politybooks.com or any of your favorite independent booksellers.
So when you're writing this book, because you disappeared for a minute, right?
Yes.
Like you got off social media.
Yes.
Because I paid attention. I was like, where is she? Why is she returning my text? I can't find her. So you get off social media and because you were writing this book.
Yes.
How long did it take you?
So start to finish, cover to cover, it took me 9 months to write this book. But every time I thought I was done, something else would happen. So I thought I was done, was ready to ship it off to the publisher, and then the government shutdown happened. And it raised all these questions about the vulnerability of people in this current political moment when we can't get past party labels to focus on basic quality of life issues. What does that mean? And so I tell people all the time, it took me 9 months to write the book, but this was really a life's work of experiencing politics in different ways, of understanding the conversations that I've had with students, the kind of angst that a lot of people feel right now, particularly young people, about what the world will be that they will inherit and what the country will be. So it was a lot of work. I believe that social media absence, that social absence in general, was important because it allowed me to focus. And I'm not just a professor and an author, I'm also a mom and a wife and a community leader. So it was managing all of those roles and prioritizing.
And so what brought you to New Haven?
So work brought me to New Haven. I moved here from Ohio. I was an assistant professor at Yale in political science and African American studies, and thought I would stay in New Haven maybe a year or two. A year or two became 5. And now, 16 years later, I'm here. And it's also why I get so upset when I hear people talk badly about Connecticut and about New Haven,
Mm-hmm.
particularly for those of us who chose to be here.
Mm-hmm.
I always turn the question back, well, if you see all these problems, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And if all you're going to do is complain, you probably should go ahead and relocate.
Well, it's easy. It's easy to sort of complain, particularly when you're not gonna put boots on the ground, and
Exactly.
it's for those other people to sort of do, right? Like that's always the conversation. So, talk a little bit about what did you learn when you were writing this book? What came up for you that you didn't know, and you were like, aha.
Yeah, so there were a lot of moments where, I'm a professor. This is what I do every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I really had to humble myself and let the research speak for itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's had an impact on how I think about these issues, how I navigate, and how I teach. So one of the things that was important to me in this book, I talk about gender identity and the ways in which gender and sexual identity have shaped the political experience. And I learned about this man named Leonard Matlovich, who was a veteran, Vietnam War veteran, served in the United States Air Force. Matlovich believed that he could have an impact if he came forth and told his story. So he outed himself as gay in the 1970s. In the 1970s, right? And he wanted to show his superiors, look, I can be an amazing service member and be gay. The two don't have to be at odds with one another. And he was dishonorably discharged. And so for him, it was this reality check moment of what citizenship meant for him in his life and what he wanted it to mean for other people. So in the book, I have a picture of his tombstone that says, the military gave me a medal for killing 2 men and a dishonorable discharge for loving 1.
Whoa.
And that was the wow moment.
That is a wow moment.
Right? And that sits with me. The ways in which we prioritize certain behaviors, the ways that we demonize certain identities and experiences, and how it calls out the hypocrisy of this enterprise called American democracy.
Mm-hmm. And so where do you think we as people ought to process this kind of information? Where should we be turning our attentions and paying attention to around what is happening to us? Because, you like we hear all these conversations. I hear 2 conversations. Black people can't get together.
Right.
Or Black people are not monolithic. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's 2 different, two different sides here. And where should we? And both of those may or may not be true, right, or are true, or somewhere in the truth. So how should we maneuver in those waters?
I think often when people complain that Black folks can't get together, what it really means is Black people won't get together on this issue that I care about, that I think should be your priority.
I like that. We'll put that on social media.
And that's that's the thing. So Black people could get together in Selma, Alabama to march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge without having a Facebook, an Eventbrite, or a Snapchat or a cell phone to text out, meet John Lewis at the base at this time. People could get together to support Black Panther last year and come out beautifully adorned to talk about what it meant to see this story on the big screen that had been relegated to graphic novels for so long. People can get out to vote in an election or to show up at a school board meeting to say, while you are arguing about title and position, there are children who are watching you and deserve to be represented. So I don't take seriously that claim that Black folks can't get together.
I don't either. I really don't.
It annoys me.
It annoys me too, because I was like, either you don't know the history, you don't see how far we've come, you don't know our accomplishments,
or you're not currently engaged, whether that is physically committed or institutionally committed. And at the same time, we have to recognize the diversity that exists. People have options in where they live today in a way that they didn't 20 years ago. And yet, in a place like New Haven, we know that home ownership rates still lag far behind. Economic development, business opportunities still lag far behind. So we can affirm the difference that exists within communities, with any other community, that's what you do, and still say, what are the key policies that we need to rally around?
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired of rallying around individuals. Let's rally around issues.
Yes. So do you think we still have a necessary need for all these organizations that sort of do the public good?
Yes.
Okay.
And I say that as chairman of an organization that is supporting multiple nonprofits across this region.
The Community Foundation for Greater New Haven.
Exactly. So I chair that board. And I have learned so much about this region as a result of that. So when I hear people complain about a homeless encampment on Whaley Avenue, right? So then I say, well, have you supported these 10 organizations that are working on behalf of people who are housing insecure? Or have you thought about what it means for a child to live in a motel near the parkway and not be able to get to his or her school where they see some sense of normalcy in their day? So I think we need these organizations. I watched the funeral services for Representative Elijah Cummings, and it was moving to me to see his brothers of Phi Beta Sigma, his brothers of Prince Hall Masons, his brothers of Sigma Pi Phi, the Boule, come in and circle the family in that space. Because what it reminded me was, for African Americans in particular, but really for anyone from an underrepresented or under-networked group, those organizations provide a leadership opportunity, leadership development when other spaces deny it. It is a sense of encouragement when you feel like your very existence is being denied at times. So we need those organizations. And those organizations can provide social benefits, they can provide instrumental benefits, and they also can show a presence that we can have a good time on Saturday and show up to work on Monday and do the work of community building.
That's a good way to say. I like that. I like when you say that, because I think there's again, there's a couple of communities who feel like maybe some of these organizations are elitist and they don't really do the people's work, or how can they party the way they party and say they're doing this work, and I'm always thinking, where did y'all come from? Because that's been the Black experience, red parties and people coming together and family reunions and all of that, and still able to sort of do the work of the community.
I have always believed, and again, this is part of my upbringing and my family's approach, we have always believed that joy is an act of resistance. That in a country and in a space where the expectation is that you will always be so broken and so perpetually angry and so perpetually downtrodden, that you are not allowed to just be. And so for me, if I find joy in music, which I love music, right? If I find joy in music, if I find joy in a poem, or if I find joy in a movie that will never make it to the big screen, that's my act of resistance. And I claim it, I defend it fiercely, and I defend that for other people. Why shouldn't people have the opportunity to have fun, to have a moment where they don't have to be so fearful of how their joy will be policed and interpreted? And I find that happening a lot on social media today when people are debating whether to go see the movie Harriet.
Yeah.
Right? Go see it or don't.
Yeah.
But don't try to make this as some sort of litmus test for my wokeness.
Yeah.
Because it becomes clear that your woke ain't like mine.
Yeah. I stayed out of that fray. I posted up something that a friend of mine wrote, and I thought it was right on point about, just go see it and deal with it however way you deal with it. But I say that about any film. White,
Exactly.
black, red, green,
Exactly.
or otherwise. There are things that I would see that other people wouldn't see, that I dig and other people wouldn't dig. And unless it's so egregious to my sensibilities, I'm not going to protest it. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Some things you got to protest.
And you have the right to do that, right? If that is not what you want to see, I, for example, stopped watching the videos of unarmed civilians being killed because it was seeping into my soul. And I felt like in some ways Black death has become
porn
spectacle, right? It's this pain porn, and it's become spectacle all over again. And I chose not to do that. But I also understood that for many people, they need to watch it because they don't want to be desensitized. And they want to remember what it means in a place like Chicago for Laquan McDonald to be shot in the back so that people don't get too comfortable. That's their choice and that is mine. But to say that you are somehow not in tune with struggle or that you are not supportive of Black men because you went to watch this film, then the day is so silly to me that is the marker that we use for policing someone's connection to community.
Yeah. So, do you talk about Black women in your book?
I do. Yeah, I'm a little biased as a Black woman.
Are you?
Just saying. No, but the context that I talk about in the book is in the electoral arena. So I was able to join with a group of women a few years ago who wrote a letter to Tom Perez, who is chair of the Democratic National Committee. And what we said was, it means nothing for you to applaud Black women. All the headlines said Black women saved America after that Senate race out of Alabama, where, Doug Jones and Roy Moore, right? So all the headlines said Black women saved America. And what we said very simply is, it means nothing to applaud Black women if you don't support and invest in Black women. To stop expecting Black women to show up at the polls if you don't invest in them as candidates, as campaign managers, and all of the myriad ways that Black women have served, even when others were not able to do so. And so for me, you cannot talk about democracy, whether you're talking about religion and politics or gender and politics or class, without looking at the unique role of Black women within that enterprise.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, my soror, Paula Giddings, wrote a book, When and Where I Enter, So Goes the Race. And that had to have been like 30 years ago, right? I still think about that book in terms of when I enter spaces and I am the only. I'm the only still when I go in certain spaces. And I find that in 2019 so strange that we have arrived, but we haven't. That we're still the first, the only in spaces where we haven't traditionally been.
And I think some people revel in that. I think some people enjoy being the first or the only. To me, that's a hollow prize, because there are all of these unfair expectations that come along with that. And we see that locally, we see it nationally.
Yeah.
If you are the first, you are expected to solve 200 years worth of ills in 2 weeks. And if you don't,
you out.
But then you make it harder for the next person to come after you, because that expectation is there. I fully understand that when I show up in particular spaces, and I always show up fully as myself, which means how you see my hair today may not be how you see my hair 2 days from now, depending on how I feel. I show up fully as myself. My name is Kalila. If you mispronounce it, I will correct you, because it means something for my mother to name me in this Arabic tradition of God's child. I had to grow into that name.
I was going to, I've adopted children. That Kalila was a name that was on the list of names.
It's a good list.
But we picked Khalil for our son.
Yeah. And so that's how I show up. And I understand that it surprises people when I show up.
Do you feel like people think you're too Black? Because I get that sometimes. I don't really care at this point. But I remember getting that, like, when you show up as your authentic self and they're not used to that, or they're used to a different kind of representation, it's unsettling for people.
I think that
Black and white.
Well, I was going to say, there's a supporter of this station who listens frequently and writes in frequently, and he will automatically know that I'm referencing him. He stopped me at a store one day and said, "We don't know how to take you." And I said, "Who are you?" I'm just saying, stranger danger, who are you? And he said, "People can't figure you out." And I said, "Brother, that's a good thing, because people don't know what to expect." So there are people who will say to me, "You're so articulate."
Oh my God.
And they will mean it as a compliment.
And it's true.
But I will say, "Ma'am, I have a PhD. I have taught in an Ivy League institution. I can speak the King's English proficiently, but I also know how to code switch to make it clear to my students, your success will hit differently when you work for it and earn it, and not expect that it will be given to you." So I understand that. I understand that a lot of it for people is familiarity. And so I don't feel like I need to be obstinate to say, well, what do you mean? But I will make it clear to you, you should perhaps never offer that again as a compliment, and let you know why. So that's how I navigate those spaces. But I also understand why I'm here to do this work. That I'm not here just for me. I'm here for my mother, who raised 3 girls and helped us believe we could take on the world. I'm here on behalf of my grandmother, who graduated from high school when it was called a training school, because it was an all-Black school, and the thought was we need to train Black kids to be servants, not to be scholars.
And we still have that mind. That mindset is still very prevalent. Still very prevalent. I was in a meeting the other day, and I was like, if I have to hear folks talking about construction training for our kids one more time, but we're not trying to send them over to the Holberton school.
And I want our kids to have options. I want all children to have options, right?
Yes.
If you decide that a construction trade is for you, excellent. But let's also get you in some business management courses so you can own your construction firm, so you can figure out how to get contracts and you can create wealth, not just income. Babs, I'm someone whose guidance counselor told me in high school, college really wasn't for me because I wasn't the college type.
Oh, my guidance counselor told me. He's like, she was like, this is a Vogue Tech school. Why would you want to go to college? Oh, I don't see that happening. Oh God.
I'm top 10% in my high school, student leader, all these things. And I believed her because she was the authority. And I believed her when she said, perhaps you should go learn how to do nails because college isn't for you. It took my mother. A teacher called my mother and told her what happened, told her, your daughter is sabotaging her application because of this reason. My mother showed up to school, didn't tell me she was going to be there. And we looked just alike. So another student said, I think I saw your mom going into the guidance counselor. And I was like, what did I do? An hour later, she comes out with a stack of applications and said, my daughter will have options. So that motivated me. That every time I went to college and I didn't really want to get up for class because who thinks that an 8 a.m. class is a good idea in college? That was the motivation to send her the copy of the Dean's List letter, to send her when I got into this PhD program, fully funded, to send her that. And it's why I navigate the way I do now, because I know that there are children in this city and across this state who are facing that same thing, of parents who feel like if people in authority are telling me my child is not worthy, how do I combat that? A parent walking in for an IEP conference, not knowing what they should do.
Yep.
And so that's why I feel like my life's journey, my life's calling is to show up and, more importantly, to listen.
Yes. Yes. So what do you want people to take away from this book? What's the conversation you like to see people have around this book?
The conversation that I want people to have is, what do we do and what do we need to know? We are in a time of incredible hubris at every level of government, where people think they have figured it all out, where we can put people into neat boxes. So I want people to read this book and think about the ways that pop culture, for example, communicates to us about what our political views should be, about what our identity should be. I want every time a person hears a news story or they hear something from their coworker, I want them to question that and understand that it wasn't about people supporting Hillary Clinton just because she was a woman or supporting Donald Trump just because he was white. Because let's be clear, 13% of Black men voted for Donald Trump as well. What is it about the message and the content that resonates with people? What does that tap into? Because if we keep getting so wrapped up into people, into position, we forget that long after they've gone,
the damage is done.
The damage is done. The institutions, the norms that affect our lives every day. And the real thing I hope, Babs, is that people will take away from this book understanding the importance of the local level.
Yes.
This is where you can have the greatest impact on people's everyday lives.
Yes.
On public safety, on education, on housing, and on jobs.
This is why I love this city so much.
Yeah.
Because this is a city where you can jump in at any place and make a tremendous difference in whatever it is you believe. You know, whether it's showing up at the Board of Ed meetings, whether it's showing up to the chambers at the Board of Aldermen, it's you can make a difference. You can volunteer and make a tremendous difference in this town, in ways that it's harder to do in other places, I think.
I think it is conducive to that. Now, let me be honest. 16 years later, people still ask me where I went to high school and still use that as a marker. Like, oh, you didn't go to Cross? You didn't go to Lee? You didn't go to Hill House? Well, where did you go? Right? And so we sort of talk
Well, that
through
means that means that people fully believe you're entrenched in this
and
city.
I'm entrenched, and I
Yes.
love that because I am. Right? We are committed to this place, and we are committed to doing that work. But I think also for people who complain, who don't like how things are, or want to see differences, contact me, because I can give you a list of 200 nonprofits who are working on these issues. And if you don't feel like it's representing you, let's talk about how you launch your own initiative.
Whoa.
And how you come together
I like
with
that.
like-minded people. We can't complain our way into prosperity. We have to commit to it, right?
How much more time you got doing the community foundation as the chair?
Oh my goodness. So this is just my first year as chair.
Oh, okay. So you got a lot of time left.
Well, I'm eligible for one more year as chair, and I have 3 years left, 2.5 years actually left on my term. We serve for 7-year terms, and it is an amazing board. And I walk into that space and learn from my board members every day. We are embarking on a new program we call Inclusive Growth, so that you can't talk about growth and development in this region without reaching the people who traditionally have been left out of those conversations. And so I hope that will be a part of my legacy as a part of the board.
I like that. I think, somebody's got to be thinking about that at that level. It can't just be the organizations that serve these populations that are having these conversations, but they have to happen at the where resources are allocated from.
And to see our role as a connector, the ways that we can act from a place of respect in the community, the ways we can connect business interests and development interests with policymakers, with community organizations and community folks who may not know our name as a foundation, but are affected by our work on a daily basis. And I think there's a lot of work to be done there, but I'm excited that the board has committed to it and made it a priority, because that isn't always the case. And how we work with other foundations across the state, so that you can't talk about the challenges of, say, the opioid crisis by only focusing on New Haven. You have to look at the region and understand why people find their way here.
Because we have the resources here.
We have the resources.
That other cities and towns don't have.
Right. And if we have the resources, how do we fortify those resources so that people can live healthy and productive lives and be able to create opportunities for their family?
So what do you say to your daughter these days? How old is she?
Oh, my baby is 11.
So she's 11. So she's getting the message of what beauty is, what weight is, what other girls are doing. How do you quell some of that?
It's a tough age at this time, and I think it is tougher for her peer group now than it was for mine. And it was tough enough for me. And I was teased for being a nerd. This geeky kid who would come home excited, like, today we blew something up in science class. And my friends would just kind of look at me like, are you going to the skating rink today or not? So it's different, because that teasing ended when the school bell rang. Now these kids are constantly connected with social media and cell phones and all of that. And so what we have done, and my husband and I are from the same hometown, so we bring those kind of Southern beliefs. We have intentionally surrounded her with people who pour into her life in every dimension. She is in a part of an after-school program with Marcella Flake, who reminds that baby every single day that she's beautiful, that she's smart, that she is capable.
That's dancing, right?
It's
music.
Academics, it's music, it's dancing, it's coding and robotics. So whatever interest she has, we let her know, try it, go for it. So Monday night, she's over at Southern Connecticut State learning robotics and coding with the high school kids.
Oh, I like that.
And what is also important for me is that she be able to navigate any space that she finds herself in and understand what she's called to do in this life. And that is to be her beautiful, brilliant, brown girl self with no limits.
I like that. I like that very much, because I think girls, particularly, I think all girls are having trouble with this self-image and self-worth. But I think Black girls, because, depending on where you are on that color wheel, There's just issues at every turn.
Mm-hmm.
Dark skin, light skin, this, that, and the other thing. And these kids are having a really tough time trying to navigate those waters.
And I think we are starting to understand the seriousness of this, right? When I was growing up, and Babs, I'm sure there's the same for you when you were growing up. If you had a problem, you either prayed it away or you just went and dealt with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Girl,
Like,
yes.
get over yourself. I have to go to work and figure this out. I can't talk about why you feel sad. And I think we are realizing that at a very young age, we have to listen to children. It has always been important to us that our daughter knew that she owned her body, she owned her space, and she owned herself.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to hug anyone. You don't have to talk to anyone that you don't want to. You set your boundaries, and we support that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those boundaries are physical. They are mental health boundaries for our kids.
Yes.
And to understand that our kids are watching and they are listening. And we have to treat them as people, not as little adults, but as human beings who are worthy of every good thing that we want for ourselves.
I like that. What are you reading these days?
Oh, I'm reading everything. So I'm reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book. I'm excited that he's coming to the area.
I know. I've got it on Audible.
Yeah.
Because I saw this little thing where he said he got it on Audible too.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I'm in my house, I'm listening. And it's Joe Morton who is doing the narration. And he's like, I almost forgot I wrote this book.
That's amazing. Can you imagine having Joe Morton do, it is my goal that one day I will write a book and Sam Jackson will do
I'm just trying.
Audible.
So is that the next book? Am I getting a scoop?
No, one can hope, right? We can name it and claim it. I'm reading that book by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm reading Lonnie Bunch's book about his experience creating the National Museum, African American History
He
and
was
Culture.
just here. Did you catch him when he was here?
I was away. So I'm on this, mini book tour. So I was away, but I'm hoping to catch him in DC. And I'm reading lots of books by friends. Reginald Dwayne Betts has a new collection of poetry called Ficklin.
I want to get it. I'm a poet by heart.
It is phenomenal. So I encourage people to go pick it up. My good friend Nyambi Carter has a book about Blacks and immigration in the U.S. So I'm constantly reading. The tough thing during the academic year is that it is always so academically focused. But having these 3 books on my bedside makes me feel like a real person because I'm not just crunching data and looking at numbers.
Yeah, I mean, you got to do it. I mean, you have to take that time for yourself. Yeah. So you're having a book reception.
Yes.
When is it?
So we have 3 coming up next week that are open to
I know
the
there's
public.
one at the Keeler Lydell.
Right. So that's Sunday. That's all sold out.
Okay.
Thank you to everyone who's coming to support. Next Tuesday at Quinnipiac University at 6 p.m.
Okay.
The public is invited to come. It will be hosted by Lucy Nalpathanchel from WNPR Radio.
Okay.
So we'll be focused on where we live.
Okay.
And then next Thursday, I'll be at RJ Julia Books in Middletown as part of the Wesleyan University bookstore.
Yes, I was just there the other day. Yes.
It's phenomenal.
Okay.
So I hope to see the public there. I hope people will buy the book. I hope they will talk about it. And most importantly, they will act.
Is there a scoop for another book? Are you working on another book? Thinking about another book?
I'm 3 books in terms of where we go. So in terms of scoop, the next book is called Against Reform. And it is really challenging us to rethink the criminal justice reform movement in the United States.
That's near and dear to my heart.
It is. And it is based on my experiences working on death penalty reform here in the U.S. and also being someone who's lost family members to violence. So how do we center the experiences of victims to really transform this system so that it's not this piecemeal one-off, look at these 2 people we helped. How do we really have a holistic approach to repairing communities?
And
overall?
I think that's the next step in criminal justice. Right. I do. I really think that's the next step. Mm-hmm. And so I can't wait to read that. But now, the book that's of the moment is Identity Politics in the United States, in the U.S. Thank you, Dr. Kalila Dean Brown Dean.
Thank you, Bab. Thanks for having me.
I appreciated this very much.
Thanks for supporting me.
I got you, girl. I love you.
I appreciate you.
Harry, I'm on my way out. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Everything, everything, everything gonna be all right this morning. Oh yeah. Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my mama said I'd be the greatest man alive. Now I'm a man, way past 21. You better believe it, baby. I have lots of fun. I'm a man. I spell him a child. And that represents a man. No B. Oh, child. Why? That means managed boy. I'm a man, a full-grown man. I'm a man, I'm a natural-born lover's man. I'm a man, a rolling stone. I'm a man, I'm a hoochie man. Sitting on the outside, just me and my mate. You know, I make love to you, baby. I come up 2 hours late. Now ain't that a man? I spell him a child. And that represents a man. No B. Oh, child. Why? That means managed boy. I'm a man, I'm a full-grown man. I'm a man, I'm a natural-born lover's man.